Okay, so this video is for week 5 functions. So in functions, there's a slideshow, and in there, if you look at it, there's a palindrome project. So I want to kind of demo this project using functions. Okay, so let's take a look at the sample code. So palindrome. So look at the two strings. These are two strings. You know strings by now. A palindrome is a word or a string that's the same both forward and backward. So here's a palindrome, right? Kayak. And if you go backwards, it's kayak as well. And this one says madam. And if you go back, it's madam as well. So, and this could be a string or a word. We're going to do it as a string. Okay, so we're going to see how to do it. So here is the program for that. And there's a link in your, oh, right here's the program. There's a link in your slide as well. That, go in here. So here's the palindrome project. And if you go into your slideshow here in our book. Okay, I guess I closed that. So we were in that slideshow right now. There's a link for the palindrome project, and that'll bring you to Replit, which is right here. And I've already written the program. I'm going to kind of show you how this program works. It's all about functions and strings. Okay, so we have a couple of function prototypes. So the goal is to read a string from the user in main. I read a string, and I read a string with spaces. Notice I use getLine. And then I'm going to first call a function to remove all the spaces, because if the spaces are there, then we cannot check if it's a palindrome or not. So we call a function that removes all the space. So I have a function called remove space. It takes this string, which we created in main, it takes a string and it returns a string as well. So it takes this user input string, removes all the spaces, and returns a string. So that is why in main, I'm passing test, which is a string that I read from the user. And when it comes back, I'm putting it into the same variable. I'm overwriting that string with all the spaces removed. Okay. Then I have another function to check if it's a palindrome. So isPalindrome takes that string and checks to see if it's a palindrome, and it returns a Boolean value. So it returns a true or a false. Okay. So let's take a look at the functions first. Here is my remove space function. It takes a string, returns a string. So here's the string that comes in, user input. Notice I'm declaring a different string. Don't declare the same string, because then that will become redeclaration, right? It's already coming in as a parameter. Here's another string called new string, which is initialized to an empty double quote. That means there's nothing in it. And I use that so I can take the string, remove the spaces, put it into this new string, and return it. Okay. Now, as you know, a string is nothing but a bunch of characters, as we saw in this array. So here I'm going to go find that. We were under, actually, it was right here in my D12. Sorry. So here it is, the slide, right? It has the array, which is nothing but the string. It's a string, and each letter has a position. So we are simply going to go through it and check each letter. If this letter compared to this last letter is the same, then we move one closer. This letter is the same as the next last letter, then we keep going. The minute we find that these letters are not the same, then we can stop. It's not a palindrome. So here we go. I start with I equals 0, the first index, and then you want to go till the last index. So if you look at string length, if you get the string length of the string, it's going to be 5. But 5 is not where I want to go. I want to go one less than the string length, because it starts at 0. So if you look at my for loop, it's going to be starting at 0, user input dot size. So dot size actually gives you the last character. So we are doing less than dot size. Notice my loop says less than. So user input dot size is going to return 5, but we are never going to get to 5 because it's less than. We're going to stop at 4 for the word kayak, right? And I++. If user input of I, actually here, we're not testing for a palindrome, excuse me, we are removing the spaces in this function. We check for the palindrome next. So if user input of I is not equal to a space, then we take that character and we put it into the new string. This plus equals says, take this character, add it to the new string. Notice my new string is empty initially. So we start from the beginning and we go through the whole string. Anytime it's not a space, we take that character. Notice the square bracket of I. When I is 0, we take that first character. Is it equal to a space? No. If it's not equal to a space, then we come here and take that character and put it into new string. So new string keeps getting built with all the characters, but no space. If there's a space, then we skip that and we just go back to the for loop and go to the next character. So if it's not a space, then we take that character and put it into new string. So the end of this for loop, new string will have the old string minus the spaces, right? And we return that new string. That new string comes back here and goes into test. Then we come to this if statement. If is palindrome of test, we take the string that we got back without the spaces, pass it to this function. We'll talk about that if statement in a minute. Is palindrome takes that string, it comes in as test string, doesn't matter, the parameter can be called whatever we want, right? So the string without spaces comes in here. We go through a for loop. Now here is where this for loop is a little different. Notice I start I equals 0. I also have another variable called j that I start at test string dot length also returns the length of a string. It's the same as the size. Okay. This also returns the length of the string minus 1. So I is sitting at 0, j is sitting at 4. So I initialize I to 0, I initialize j to string length minus 1. So then I can compare the letter at this position, which is I, and the letter at this position, which is j. Okay, so, and then my condition says I can only have one condition. Notice how these two initializations are separated by a comma. That's very important. There's a comma. That's not a semicolon. So two variables getting initialized. Condition is only one. We cannot check multiple conditions. You can if you use a logical operator and or, but in this case, we have one condition that checks to see I less than test string dot length divided by 2. So halfway through is all I have to go. I don't have to go through the whole string, right? As I'm walking down the string, midpoint. If I get to the midpoint, I'm done. So I only go till I gets to halfway through the length of the string. I gets incremented, j gets decremented, right? We are coming from either sides of the string. Then I check. The test is pretty easy. If test string of I is not equal to test string of j, the minute I find that this character is not the same as this character, then we stop. If not, we keep going. Okay, we get closer to the middle and we check. If these two characters are the same, we get closer to the middle. And then at this point, y is going to be equal to y and we're going to stop. So it'll work for both even number string length and odd number string lengths, right? So if the minute is not equal, I return false. I don't have to check anymore. I return false. If I've gone through the whole for loop and we found that every single letter at I is equal to a letter at j, then we know it's a palindrome and we return true. Don't need to do anything else here. Now, how do we use that Boolean function that comes back? You put it in an if statement like this. Is palindrome of test is going to return true or false. So you say if this returns a true. You don't say equals equals true. That's not a good way to test Boolean functions. We simply say if this returns a true, and that's what that means, then you output, yes, it's a palindrome. You could also say if it returns a false. How do you check if it returns a false? If you put a not around the whole thing like that, if not palindrome, then you would just flip these cout statements. That's just checking the reverse of it, right? If it's true or if it's false. So this says if it is true, then yes, it's a palindrome, else it's not a palindrome. Okay, so the way you test is depending on your logic. If you, however you want to write it is up to you. Okay, so if I run this program, so that's what this program does. I can put in strings that said kayak. If I put in kayak, kayak, it's not going to be a palindrome. Oh, it is a palindrome, I guess. Yeah. So, or you can try something else. Kayak, madam, is not going to be a palindrome. Oh, good. It helps to run my program. this and test. That's not a palindrome. Okay, so go through this function, go through this program, which is a good example on functions and loops. And when you get to arrays, there's a similar program. You can kind of refer to this to do that.